All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Take two.
I think we're on take 7 now, perhaps. For those of you just joining us, my name's Kareem Kandi. With us today is our very special guest, very talented saxophonist, oboist, clarinetist, flautist, kung fu master. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And educator. Toured with the Tommy Dorsey Band for many, many years, and actually my very first teacher here in Tacoma when he first got off the road, I believe, from touring with the band. This is Tracy Knoop, and we're very glad that he could be with us here today. And if you were tuning in at 11 o'clock, we apologize for the technical difficulties, but this should work much better for you at this time. So we're going to start from the beginning again for those of you who maybe missed what we were doing here. But so Tracy, can you tell us, for those of people out there listening that don't know, how did you get started in music?
I was born. I can remember being in 5th grade and the band director coming in and talking to the class, Mrs. Chopin's class, about, if you wanted to join band. So I went home and I told my mom and dad I want to play the trumpet. And they're like, you don't want to play the trumpet, honey. And I was kind of upset by that. And then I talked to my grandmother about it, and she said, well, ask him if you can play the saxophone. Your dad kind of played the saxophone. He could play like 2 tunes. He didn't really play the saxophone. So I asked them, they said, well, if you can find one cheap enough. And so I called everywhere, and I called Andy's band shop finally, and I found a Vet Schaefer saxophone, horrible saxophone actually, for $6 a month. And my parents said that was okay. So I started band at DeLong Elementary with Keith Gorsuch. He was also my high school band director later on down the road. And that's it. That's it was just school and joined band, and that was that.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, and so I want to make sure we go over this stuff again and don't miss any information here. So prior to that, you said your teacher that you began with was having you do a lot of things by ear, playing songs by ear.
Yeah, Mrs. Chopin. She played piano in class every day. Even during, while we were doing mass, she'd be playing piano. And so I would stay after school, and she'd say, well, let's play this song. And she would teach me the national anthem by ear, or the Battle Hymn of the Republic, or whatever, simple songs. And I was able to, learn those things by ear easily. And it was more, believe it or not, it was more fun than playing, hot cross buns in band, where you're playing G, 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 again.
I should probably add that we've had a couple shots between the first interview and this, so we're a little bit more, I guess, ready to have a relaxed conversation for all of you fine folks out there. Not that we're condoning that at
it's
1 in the
too
afternoon.
early for any of you.
Anyways, okay. Well, as I was mentioning earlier, so I talked with Julian 2 weeks ago, and I talked with Bill Ramsey last week, and they were talking about how they first came to music, a lot of it by ear first. Mm-hmm. And so now, in today's day and age, you join band, you learn how to read the notes off the page. Mm-hmm. But from what you were saying is you were doing a lot of this stuff without necessarily learning all the notes first, or in conjunction with being in band, you were simultaneously developing a strong ear and playing by ear.
Yeah, I think a strong ear, playing by a strong ear for sure. Band conventionally, moves very slow. And I am of the opinion that our children are able to learn much faster than we think they are. It doesn't take much to be able to look at a fingering chart and figure out where your fingers are supposed to go. And then if you match that to your voice. So I would just hear songs and I would sing it, and I would grab my saxophone and I'd find the note and put one foot in front of the other and start playing Chicago tunes and Blood, Sweat, and Tears and, all that popular music of the day.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I've never heard you say that before. I mean, talking with you, I've known you for many, many years because I started studying with you, and it has to be like 1991, 92, somewhere around there. When did you get off the road with Tommy Dorsey?
Yeah, 91,
long time ago. But I remember asking you about this, and I remember you saying that your father used to always watch the Tonight Show band, and so you were hearing jazz in the house at an early age.
I was, and actually, one of the things that drew me towards improvisation and the music they call jazz, I call it improvisation. I must have been really bored one day, and I was searching through my parents' attic, which was the forbidden place for some reason. I don't know why, there was nothing in there, but there's a big box of records. And I saw these Charlie Parker records and Paul Desmond, Jerry Mulligan, and I listened to those records, and when I heard the saxophone being played like that, I thought, well, that's way more fun than hot cross buns, and so I just started to learn it by ear, just without even thinking about it. No one said you should or you shouldn't, or no one said you have to transcribe. Or, I mean, at that time, I think my first saxophone teacher actually was Bill Forsyth, who I know you know.
Yeah. Yes.
And classical guy, great guy. And then we talked about Mel Washington, who was the greatest guy in the world. I loved him very much. But he never really taught. But the greatest thing about him was, like, when I was young, he played in all the clubs. This place on the Supper Club on 6th Avenue. I can't remember the name of it, but I would sneak in there with my horn. And I'd dress in a 3-piece suit and all black club pretty much, and I wasn't supposed to be in there. But they took care of me, and they said, "Get up there, kid," and they let me play, and they it was great. It was an experience that probably people don't get anymore.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit in the first interview that was an enormous debacle earlier, but we're live now. But we talked about how, and I've had the same experience from musicians all over the world, basically. It's not really about race or skin. It's just about how well you play and if you're a nice person or not. And every single club or group of musicians, if you're respectful and kind and are genuinely trying to do right by the music, they take care of you and accept you in and share information.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, I would agree with that completely. It's such a different language. It goes deeper than words, I believe, because it really attacks emotion on many levels, Right.
You're expressing yourself instead of, like, right now we're having a conversation, we have our subject that we're talking about, and we're expressing ourselves with words. Well, if we're playing a song, the song is the topic of conversation, and you're expressing yourself with notes and rhythms in the moment with other musicians.
And expressing your life's experience and thoughts, yes. Much broader than in a single-line conversation. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I know last year you were in Panama playing at the jazz festival down there with Danilo Perez and all those guys. And I'm sure there were probably moments that you encountered where you didn't necessarily understand what someone was saying language-wise, but with music you can convey instantly what's going on.
It's absolutely true, and it was a great experience in Panama. And Danilo's a great guy. He has, he talks about music. Music has no racism to it. It's a lens at how he looked through at life, and it's beautiful. Like when things go wrong, he says, if things go wrong, when you think they're going to go right, just consider rehearsal for tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, okay, I want to go back to, because I want to get your history here, because and we were talking about this earlier before the phone started rolling, that a bio only conveys so much. It conveys, like, it takes 4 or 5 decades worth of someone's life and condenses it down into 3 paragraphs, and you never really see the whole thing. So going back, so you're at middle school with Keith Gorsuch, who's a tremendous teacher, and from there,
grade school Keith Gorsuch, and then in Hunt Middle School with Dick Nye, who I actually saw down in Olympia just about a year ago. And the thing that the defining moment was, I remember I was playing in jazz band in 7th grade, I think, and I got this music, and it was entitled Marshall, dedicated to Marshall Royal, great lead alto player with the Count Basie Band. And I'd played by ear songs, but I'd never improvised or even inflected. I just would play the straight melody. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was playing the song, and all of a sudden I started adding stuff, just inflecting melody. I didn't know where it came from, but by the time I got to the end, my eyes were closed, and I was still playing. I opened my eyes, and my band director was staring at me, and I was staring at him, and I was like, what just happened? And next to the birth of my children, it's the greatest feeling I've ever experienced in my life. And that was at that point I said, this is for me. I'm going to become a musician.
Well, here's a bit of a tangent. I remember asking Bill about this, too, because I've listened and played in bands with both of you guys and had the opportunity to hear you both play lead alto, which, we hear, as educators and musicians, we hear lots of people play, lead alto in a big band. But it's a certain type of conception. And is that something that you studied and practiced or just came naturally? Or how did you get, because you have a really good sound and way of leading a section. So how did you come to that?
I think just listening. I think being on the road with the Tommy Dorsey Band, I was very young, and I was thrown into the hot seat. And fortunate enough to work with Buddy Morrow, who is, one of the greatest lead players that I've ever heard on any instrument. Not really a jazz player. He could play jazz, but, he was a protege when he was 16. He was at Juilliard. He's in Paul with Paul Whiteman, Tommy Dorsey, the real guys. And he singly could bury the band by himself, and he was that strong. But his lead, he taught me how to play lead. I think that's really where I learned, not from a saxophone player, but from him.
Well, there's again a bunch of stuff I want to cover, but this brings me to another point, and I talked with Bill last week in the interview. In that time, even in the 80s, you know, we're talking late 70s, early 80s, big bands were still touring and playing quite a bit more than they were now. And it seems like in 2020, there aren't as many opportunities for bands to play like that because of economics. And therefore, there's not a lot of opportunities for young players to really get those types of experiences that you had. Would you agree with that?
There's not, and it's sad. I was lucky enough to be at the very end of it. I'm the last generation that probably will ever get to experience that. And that was my dream. That's why I went to Berkeley School of Music. I wanted to go there. I wanted to go on the road with the band. I mean, that was what I wanted to do. And yeah, we would travel, 300 days a year, and it was a crazy life.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get to that. So you're middle school. So then you go to high school, and you
back to Keith Gorsuch, Foss High School, and music was my life by that point. And Foss at that time was a new concept high school, actually. So
what's the concept?
Well, yeah. Collectively, like if they saw, there are no bells. The teacher would just release class. It's an open campus, so if you want to go have lunch somewhere, you could. And they would create curriculum for certain students. I mean, it was great. If you were motivated, you could get through high school in 2 years because you could just do the work and be done. If you weren't, there was always the 5-year program, which several of my friends were a part of. But luckily, I had music, and so they created a curriculum that allowed me to like for humanities, I would teach a history of jazz class, and they would check it off. Yeah. And so I was really catered. I only spent, maybe a couple hours at high school. It was well before running start, and I would go to UPS and play in the band, the jazz band there. So it was.
That sounds very similar to Running Start, which I think you were one of when I was in high school. We talked about that, and yeah. So if somebody wanted to do something like that now today, that would be kind of the closest thing, I guess, would be Running Start.
Yeah, that wasn't even heard of then, and that only lasted due to several reasons. Politics mostly.
So you had Keith Gorsuch,
Yep.
and you mentioned earlier that he had performed with the Stan Kenton Band.
Yeah, I chose Foss High School because Wilson High School and Foss High School, they both wanted me to come be part of their band programs. Dale Strickland was at Wilson, great guy, and Keith was at Foss, and I chose Foss because of that, because Keith had a lot of jazz experience. He was at Stan Kenton for a little while. He played trombone, vibraphone. He was an arranger. I'd heard that band come to my middle school and play, and they always sounded good. And so I chose Foss. Yeah,
he's still around teaching and playing. I just ran into him at the grocery store pre-pandemic, pre-sheltering in place. But even when I was coming up in school, he was still teaching and playing and assisting at Mason Middle School. Yep. And we played together. All of us played together in the Pierce College big band back in the day.
Yep.
So yeah. Okay. And we were talking about other musicians that you had gone to school with. We mentioned Steve Bentley, who is from Tacoma now, a great drummer in Olympia. John Hansen, who played trumpet in...
He went to Curtis, but yeah, when I first met John, he played trumpet.
Okay, right.
And we were in All Northwest band together.
And Greg Schrader,
trombonist,
great trombone player.
Jim Prebino,
saxophoner,
saxophonist.
He's in Olympia now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we had a big group of. I mean, they were older than me. Sorry, guys.
And there were places that you guys could play and hang out and.
Yeah, well, we'd play at each other's houses. I mean, that was we just there was no, like I said before, there was no internet, there was no video games, maybe there was Pong. But, besides just, going out and playing ball or riding your bike, you would go to your friends and play and jam. It was just what we did. And I think it's one of the things that makes me sad to see that a lot of young, great, really talented musicians, kids, don't have that opportunity. And I think that's something that we all got to work on as educators, yeah.
Yeah, well, even before sheltering in place with all the screens, people were sheltering in place.
Right,
really,
exactly correct.
Out in the open.
Exactly, yeah. And there's nothing that replaces sitting down and having that musical conversation with another musician. And to all my friends out there that are suffering because of that, hey, we're right there with you, and we'll be back,
That's why we're doing this type of stuff
right
now. So, all right, so you wrapped up high school, and I remember you saying something. You were also doing some stuff with UPS at the time, some classical stuff with Bob Musser?
Yeah, Bob Musser. Yeah, all my teachers were classical teachers. Like I said, it wasn't until I found those records, and I thought, this sounds like more fun than the Paul Cresson Concerto. I hated that music then, but I could read and I could play, and so my teachers were like, oh, teach the boy how to, lots of notes. And I'd go, I was always first chair in the all-state band, all-state jazz band. But it wasn't really my voice. With that said, I do love that music now, and it really did teach me how to play well. But yeah, none of my teachers were jazz teachers until I got to Berkeley. Yeah.
I think that's interesting that you say that. Like for me, growing up, I think the first music that I really got into was rap and hip hop, and then from there, jazz music, and then I didn't really like classical music, and now 41 years of age, I think part of that, like, for example, the first time I heard Charlie Parker, you got me onto Charlie Parker, and all I had was nothing but Charlie Parker cassettes. From there, the first time I heard John Coltrane was like maybe late 50s, early 60s Coltrane, and I hated it.
I hated it too.
Yeah.
My father had this 8-track, and I remember it was Chim Chim Cheree, and first of all I said, Dad, that's not the saxophone, that's an oboe. He said, no, it's saxophone, and I hated it. And about 2 years after that, I was listening to a lot of jazz, and I went back and listened to it again, and I thought, wow, that's one of the greatest things I've ever heard.
That's what I was going to say. The same thing with, like, Wayne Shorter. The first time I heard it,
Right.
didn't like it at all. But then after, like, maybe, 10 years of not intentionally trying to like that music, but just learning music and playing gigs and growing as a musician, your ear gets more sophisticated, I would say, for lack of a better term, and you appreciate more things because you can hear it.
Yeah, it's like talking to a 5-year-old. You have to use certain vocabulary. Yes. Talking to a 20-year-old, you can use different vocabulary. So it's the same with music.
Yeah, so with students, it's not necessarily like you have to like this music. It's
No.
just like what you enjoy, play the music that you like, and then just keep going with music, and you will naturally grow as a
Find your voice.
musician.
With my students, it's never about, you have to play this, you have to play this. My goal is always to teach them to play their instrument well so that they can play the music they want to play. Yeah. And that's the bottom line. Like, academically speaking, like the way they teach in college, it's this, I disagree. But that's just me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. It's our job as educators to help people play music better so they can play the music that they like, not what we want them to like.
Yeah, and also it opens up opportunities for other people that might not be attracted to instrumental music. So it only creates a better venue and opportunities for us also. So like that's the way you build an audience. You don't just say, if you don't like bebop, what 12-year-old's gonna like bebop? Rebop, maybe.
All right. Well, okay. So we're high school, then going on. So how did you decide on the Berkeley School of Music?
Well, I mean, I subscribed to Downbeat, and Berkeley was always mentioned. Downbeat magazine. Berkeley's always mentioned as like the premier jazz school in the nation. And at Foss High School, there was an ex-Foss Falcon that came in, Phil Person, my dear friend, came into we actually had a music theory class then, and he came in and Keith introduced him, and Keith would just play notes, and Phil would say, well, that's E, that's F sharp, that's A, perfect pitch, curveball. And then he'd play chords and go, and in inversions, he could name every chord.
So really quickly, we know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. They might not necessarily. What does perfect pitch mean?
Like you hear a note and you know exactly what the name of it is.
Yeah, that's those guys. They can hear like a vacuum cleaner and tell you what note it is, and it's right. And we hate them because music comes easy for them.
When I was quick story, when I was in junior high school, I could always hear things that I guess other people couldn't hear. I don't know. I always thought they could. So like when someone would play a wrong note or be out of tune, I would always, squint and look and go make a face. Finally, my band director came up and said, Tracy, not everybody hears things exactly like you. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, it's just exactly what I said. I said, they don't? Because I didn't realize. Then I said to him, they must think I'm a real jerk. And he said, well, yeah, Yeah, well, I had a lot of apologies.
I know Cliff Cologne has perfect pitch. That son of a...
Yeah.
We love Cliff. He's great. But yeah, that's I guess perfect pitch can be kind of a blessing and a curse because if people think they're playing well and then they're not, how do you address it?
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah. All right, cool. So you get to Berkeley.
Yeah, so Phil played, and I thought, wow, I know if I really want to play, I have to be able to do that. And he went to Berkeley, so it was just... And plus, there were, the saxophone teachers there, two in particular, Jimmy Mosher, who I didn't know at the time, but was my very first teacher there for the first semester, quarter, whatever it was. But I went there really for Joe Viola, who was a world-renowned woodwind teacher. Played in the NBC Orchestra under Toscanini, and got out of the music business because he hated the business, but was a student of the saxophone and flute and clarinet and oboe his whole life. And
I'd like you to talk more about him because some people you can Google him and there's a couple of YouTube videos floating around, but it's towards the end of his life. Mm-hmm. And you know, a lot of people don't really know he was kind of like the guru or Yoda of the saxophone.
He was Marcel Moulet's protege. Okay. So he started with Marcel, and he could really play, and he could play anything. You know, he would go and play piano, but as a woodwind, it's amazing. There's an album where he, if you can never find it, it's hard to find, where he does all the woodwinds on the whole album, well before its time. Yeah. But Joe, yeah, and so like my first 3 months of lessons with him, all we did was long tones. If any of my students are watching, you know where this comes from. And you know, by all rights, apparently I was a pretty good young saxophonist. But when I got to Berkeley and I walked down the hall, and you know, there's Branford Marcellus and Greg Osby and all these cats, man, I'm ready to pack and go home. I'm scared, you know, because I don't sound like them. But yeah, Joe, you know, helped fix my sound, and to this day, I think it's you know the most important thing. Long tones for 3 months, you know, like, and I remember after a month, I said, Mr. Viola, you know, when do I get to play some music? He said, as soon as you start to sound the way you should sound. Yeah. I mean, it's old school.
So he didn't necessarily work with you on jazz. He was just solely working with you on playing the saxophone
playing the
correctly.
Saxophone correctly.
Yeah.
That's correct. And then I remember, you know, into it about 2.5 months walking in and starting, you know, here we go again, an hour of long tones. Oh, boy. And I played for just about 30 seconds. And he stopped. He went over to his music cabinet and he got some music. He said, "Okay." I said, "Whoa, what's going on?" He said, "Well, you finally figured it out." I said, that's all it is? He said, "Yeah, it seems simple now, doesn't it?" It wasn't simple.
Well, so, okay. Not throwing you under the bus here. I know you're older than me. How old are you now?
58.
58. So in your 58 years and all of this stuff, years on the road, teaching for decades, being a performer for you know, most of your life at this point, and playing in all these different situations, big bands, small groups, all these different styles of music, recording, through the lens of 58 years, what would be some advice? Because we kind of, I mean, if you're like, I'm assuming you're like me, like you learn how to do things better as you grow older, what would be some advice you would give to people that are thinking about becoming a musician and getting things together that are like you feel are the most beneficial to them to improve quickly and get better?
I would say define your sound, first of all. Sound is the very, very most important thing. If you think about a singer, and what is it you like about someone's voice, besides the words and the background music? It's the sound of their voice. So sound first and foremost. Learn how to use your ear and your eyes equally. You know, in the world we live in, you know, it's all here, and this is getting lost. The art of the ear is really, really important. You have to, I think, learn how to be a chameleon. Learn how to do a million things, because you're going to need to if you're going to make it as a musician now. You can't just be. I'm not just going to be a jazz player or a classical player. You have to teach. You have to play. You have to play any genre. You have to write. You have to educate. You have to do everything. I was at the very end of an era where I believe, with rare exception, that you could just play and make a living. The greatest musicians, whether they're classical or country or whatever, all teach.
I think both of us and a lot of our other friends that are out there watching or going to watch us after the fact, it's spot on. I mean, if you want to have some sort of livelihood in music, you can't just rely on performing. I mean, it seems like even the greats now, like you said, they're all teaching or finding somewhere else to do
all
it.
of them, all of them. Yeah, and they're willing to. I mean, I was kind of a jerk when I was young. I was a purist, you know. If you don't like jazz and you don't like to swing, I don't really want to have much to do with you. Well, I've changed my tune dramatically. Life's forced me to, and I'm glad. You know, yeah.
Well, better to have more people and more opportunities in your life than less.
I think that's correct.
Well, one more big thing, and for those of you who don't know, Tracy and I, we've known each other for years. We teach together at Ted Brown Music here in Tacoma a lot, and so we both intimately know the pitfalls of life as a musician. And for people that have been in it for a while or are thinking about doing it, the hours of being a full-time musician are not great, and they're rough on a family, hard in general. Can you speak to that?
It's difficult. I was married to a great gal who came from a musical background, but it's hard on a family, and that balance is tough. There's no surefire answer other than you have to force yourself to make time. If you're going to have a family, you have to make the time somehow, and it's got to be planned out, because you're not going to be home for dinner at 6 o'clock every night.
Holidays, because holidays usually pay good money for the gig.
It doesn't matter. Just relationships in general. At being a musician, it's hard because it's just such a different life. It really is a way of life. It's who you are. So, married, friendship, whatever. You have to really work harder, I think. I think you do, because just let alone the time you have to sit and practice. You know, if plumbers don't go home and practice necessarily. Yeah.
So, okay, I just had a question, and it was there, and it was gone. Let me see.
You're getting older.
I know. God dang it. All right, well, we'll move on. Hopefully it comes back. So you're at Berkeley. You said Branford was around, Greg Osby. Who else was on the faculty? So you said Jimmy Mosher.
Jimmy Mosher, Herb Pomeroy, Eddie Tomasi, John Laporta. I mean, Greg Hopkins. I mean, the list goes on. Jeff Stout. I mean, the list really goes on and on and on.
And any other contemporary students of yours besides Branford and Greg Osby that you have gone on to play?
Walter Beasley was there. I mean, there was, tons. Makoto Ozone.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to
Terry
study
Lynn
with,
Carrington.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to study with, not Branford, Billy Pierce at all?
Billy was he had just joined the faculty, and he was traveling with Art Blakey then. So Berkeley was famous for having all these big names.
So was that the band that with the Branford and Winton were in at the same time too?
It might have been. It might have been. It might have been prior to that band, I think. Yeah. I just saw Billy with Brian Lynch actually last year, and he just retired. He became the head of the woodwind department actually at Berkeley. So when Joe died, Jimmy became the head of the woodwind department there, and then he died suddenly, tragically, really young, and then Billy took over, and he sounded just phenomenal. Yeah, Billy's great.
I should have mentioned this at the beginning. We got another half hour here. So if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask Tracy or myself, feel free to just post them on there and we will get to them. And even if we can't get to them live, we can get to them after the fact as well. So please don't be shy. We want to encourage a dialogue and have you guys ask questions here. So we'll open that up in about 10, 15 minutes. Okay, so you're at Berkeley studying. How did the opportunity to go on the road with Tommy Dorsey come about?
Well, I had lots of friends that had been on the road with Buddy Rich and the Tommy Dorsey band, Artie Shaw band. Dick Johnson from Boston actually led that band. Woody Herman. And so my friend Mark Pino had just left the Tommy Dorsey band, because it was sort of this roving circle, like you'd go from one band to the other. So Mark had left the Tommy Dorsey band to go with Buddy Rich, and after about a month he hated it because, well, at that time Buddy Rich was still on a roll.
We've heard the tapes.
Yeah, you've heard the tapes. So I got a call. So he gave my name to the road manager. And I was just living in Boston, and trying to play gigs. And it wasn't until in Boston, I was working at a parking garage, actually, and going to school. And Jimmy Mosher came in with Peter Erskine. And he said, "Tracy, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm working, man." He said, "You're not playing?" I said, "At school." And a couple weeks later, my phone started to ring, and I started to get gigs. So I started to get the name out there a little bit, and then I got that call from Dennis, and that's the reason I went to Berkeley, is I wanted to go on the road. I wanted to play with bands, man. And I accepted, and I remember I flew to Montreal in January of 1985, and we opened up the Montreal Jazz Festival, and then I was there with the band for 10 years, yeah.
And so you guys, a lot of the traveling the entire band was on a bus. Like, you were living with these gentlemen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, mostly by bus. We'd fly, but about 250,000 miles a year on the bus, maybe 300,000.
I have many questions because, as you can imagine, living with these gentlemen on a bus in close quarters can be crazy. And I mentioned earlier the Buddy Rich bus tapes. Jazz musicians know about this. If you don't know about this, just go on YouTube and type in the Buddy Rich bus tapes and give a listen. You can kind of get a little glimpse into what life could be like on the road for musicians with the tensions being high. So,
and with that said, I will say I was fortunate to do Buddy Rich's last recorded television concert live from the Palladium. He died about, I guess, a couple months after that. It sounds cruel, but we used to say, he probably thought, if I ever have to play with the Tommy Dorsey band again, I'll die, because he was with Tommy, And sure enough, he did. But he was, I mean, I think maybe he knew his predicament. And he was the kindest, most giving and amazing drummer. You didn't need a bass player. You didn't need anything but him. And he didn't read any charts, and he played them like nobody I've ever heard.
I think, a lot of musicians, and the people that I've just said, go listen to this link, you're going to think that, Buddy Rich was a terrible person. But he really was. I mean, he not a terrible person. He was a great musician who had played with some of the greatest musicians in the world and lived it his entire life, ran his own band, and held that music sacred to him. It was dear to him, and his standards were very high.
Yep.
And when he was employing people to come up to these standards and they fell short and they made him and the band look bad,
that's right,
then he let them know where he stood on things. And I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, brutal honesty is tough. Yeah. It can be cruel. And in today's world, we're taught not to be that brutally honest, which is fine, and I think it's okay. I think maybe it's good. But other generations didn't think that. Yeah,
I've talked to different musicians about East Coast and West Coast, and there is something to that, I think. And what I've heard is here on the West Coast, if you're doing a mediocre job, people kind of you're doing okay, you're doing fine. East Coast, they'll say no, this is ridiculous. You need to get. They'll say it much different than that. But the thing is,
it's true.
They're doing that because they want to help you correct something and get better quicker. And being honest about it,
it's absolutely true. I can give you. I won't mention the university, but I interviewed for the saxophone teaching position, and I was just myself, and I didn't get the job, and I knew someone on the faculty. I said, well, what was the problem? They wanted someone that could teach jazz and classical, and they hired just a classical guy. Well, your attitude, the students thought your attitude was a little too New Yorkish. I'm like, New Yorkish? Yeah. Well, there it is. Yeah.
So it's neither here nor there. I mean, I can see both sides of the coin on that. I guess just pick the teaching style that you like and go with that.
That's right. That's right.
So, all right, going back to the bus. So you are how many people?
The Iron Lung.
What was it called? The night
train.
The night train. All right. So you're on the bus with all these guys, and how many days a year are you traveling and doing?
We're doing I think the average 270 dates a year. So that's yeah.
And you could be you posted the other day on Facebook on your page, so you can find the itinerary, and it shows you're in one night you're in another city, and then the next
Chicago to St. Louis to Minneapolis to Cleveland to L.A. in 7 days. Yeah. It's called hit and run. Play the gig, get on the bus, travel, check in, sleep in the morning, play the gig, get on the bus, and travel. And then maybe if you're lucky, you get to be somewhere for a few days, or we'd always be in California in the summertime for a couple weeks, in Florida for a month in the winter, which was great. And then the overseas travel was amazing. The road.
What countries did you visit?
All across Europe, Japan several times. Amazing. Scandinavia. Denmark.
So, and I was asking Julian and Bill the same question here because I think this is important for everybody to know, and I want to know your opinions about this. Economics of being a musician and what clubs paid. I'm not talking about festival halls and things of that nature, but club pay versus the 1970s and 80s versus now. Do you feel it's roughly the same model?
It's not at all the same model because I would put it to you this way. My parents bought their house for $6,000. That was a lot of money to them, and they made a lot less. Money just went further. I mean, when I was on the road, I made a lot less than I do now, but I certainly am not living any different. So I make more, but I'm living the same. Well, that tells you it's just inflation, and it's just the world that we live in. And so clubs can't make it, you have to, they can't afford to pay a band, really. They want to. I mean, even if they fill it up, I don't know if it costs a lot of money to live here in America, I'm afraid. Yeah. I mean, if you go to Japan and you go to Europe, you've been, you see it's the whole attitude's different.
Well, I think it's not just with music. I think just the arts in general. You have these countries that are, the United States, and I'm not talking trash about the United States at all. I mean, I love this country, but it's a much younger country, and so I think the appreciation of the arts is different.
I think that's exactly what it is, and especially with jazz, because if you consider it, Western music, okay, Bach, Beethoven, whatever, this music, was developed from African Americans, slaves, gospel and blues roots. It's new. And I think part of what we're saying in America today, as much as it saddens me, is just we got to grow out of all this. And I think my generation didn't do such a good job. It's hard for me because I think so differently than most people. I'm not like most people. I don't think the same. I've known this since I was young. So did my parents. But I think it just has to grow, and sadly, some growing pains are so difficult. Yeah. I would put it that way. Yeah.
All right, so I remember. Well, let's see. Like I said, I remember you right when you got off the road, and we've talked about this. So you were in those conditions, living those conditions, both great and terrifying.
Yep.
I can imagine
Yep.
for 10 years, and you said you got off the road because you thought you had cancer.
I thought I was dying. I mean,
Yeah.
I was suffering from depression, and I didn't know it. I mean, I thought I was dying. I had every test known to man done to me. I had them all. Apparently, you can have every disease in the world all at once. But I was diagnosed as being clinically depressed, and I told the doctor when he said that, I said, "Of course I'm depressed. I feel like I'm dying." He's like, "Well, what? The chicken or the egg? Which comes first?" So they put me on some antidepressant medicine. And after a couple of weeks, I still was feeling the same. So I thought, "Okay, there you go. I'm dying." Into the third week, I'll never forget. I woke up one morning, and I was like, "I feel like myself again." And I was able to throw that medicine away, and it was just from being on the road too long. It's not. It can be very difficult. Yeah.
So you definitely have paid your dues and then some, and seen a lot. Are there any concerts? I mean, you've backed up tons of world renowned artists. Are there any concerts that stick out in your mind, or experiences like this is like one of the greatest things ever?
There's so many. Yeah, playing at the Hollywood Bowl opposite the Count Basie Band and getting to hang and with Frank Foster and those cats was great. Mel Torme, got to work a lot with him.
Did you ever get to see him play drums?
Oh yeah. I played with him playing drums. Oh yeah. And he kind of liked me, and he let me solo behind him. And although he's a funny cat, like brilliant, truly, but like the kind of guy that would kind of want to let you know it. So like he purposely, because he wrote his own arrangements, they were pretty good, but he would purposely like write a wrong note. So he'd go, trumpet, measure 14, third beat. That's supposed to be an A natural, not an A sharp. Yeah. And the old cats of the band like you've been doing that crap for years. Stop it. He'd been doing it on purpose. It's hilarious, man. Yeah. Right on.
Okay. Oh, how about devastatingly horror, like worst experiences from the road?
Yeah.
Anything you care to share?
Yeah. Terre Haute, Indiana, playing at this place called the Canopy Club. Good old boys. Hanging out. My friends would walk home, and the police knew that we were in town. So, to say the least, we had to bail several people out of jail for walking down the street. More than once. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at that time here, so hopefully you guys have been enjoying this again. We want to open things up for questions. So, do you have any questions? We have questions. It looks like we have a couple. One moment.
Which what?
National journalist?
To keep up on the music?
Which?
You mean like Leonard Feather or those kinds of guys? The written word is unfortunately
not to be trusted.
Yeah. So I don't know of any jazz journalists. The cat in Seattle, what's his name? Paul Roche? He's pretty good. Yeah. Kind of like him.
I think for most information about the music scene and musicians, I trust musicians first more than anybody else.
Yeah, I think that's right. First and foremost.
It seems like the journalists are always writing it from their bias and their opinion, and if you want to hear what's going on, the beautiful thing about 2020 is a lot of these things are live streaming. You can see these things live. You can talk right away with someone across the country or anywhere around the world about what's going on, and you can hear it from the musicians that you trust their opinions about the music, I would say.
I think that's absolutely correct.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
Favorite time period?
Now.
Yeah.
Now.
I don't think
Listen, no, I mean, like, I used to be a bebop, swing, ding-a-ling, strictly only guy, but it's a new day, and I'm getting ready to record a couple new albums. I want to say it to you guys. Hopefully, we'll get through the plague here of music, if you've known or ever come to hear me play, that you probably wouldn't expect, and I'm very excited about it. Been writing with some friends, and on my own a little bit, and very excited about it. A new voice, hopefully.
I think that's true of all musicians with in regards to that. Even though if you look at the older musicians, I mean, they were always not only studying things that came before, but also things that were going around at the same time. And other musicians, I mean, even a lot of the bebop players were listening to classical musicians and musicians of the day. Mm-hmm. And now, I mean, you know, all of us as musicians, we are sum total. We're sum totals of everything that we've listened to and checked out, whether we realize it or not, becomes part of us, and that naturally comes out in our music. So I think it's fair to say that all of us are, you know, we're going to play everything that we've assimilated.
I think that's right. Yeah, and my ear has changed dramatically from the way I used to think about playing jazz or improvised music. I should say. Yeah.
And like you mentioned, I think there's a point where, you know, you went into just listening to jazz and that's it, and then you kind of grow out of that because you maybe I don't know, have all the answers, but maybe you get like bored of just the same thing and you want to hear other things.
That's right. You know? That's right. And it's also a reflection of the world that we live in. You know, being broader, more open. Mostly in good ways. I really feel like, you know. Yeah.
And when you play with musicians from other countries, I mean, they've listened to the same jazz stuff that you might have heard, and then they've listened to their folk music and their influences and their rhythms.
That's absolutely correct. Yep.
All right, other questions? Yes.
Can Tracy talk about how his playing is evolving now?
Well, yeah.
The question is, can Tracy talk about how his playing is evolving now?
I'm doing a lot more writing. It's changed a lot. It's changing a lot. I'm experiencing a more honest approach to the way I play, and I'll give you an example. I was in Panama for the Panama Jazz Festival. We played this great gig at Danilo's Jazz Club, all this stuff, and the last night before we left, got invited to come back to Danilo's Club, and with this great percussionist, Omar, and he says, "Well, we'll come and play a couple tunes." You know, so he said the theme is Inner Urge. I said, "That's fine. I know the tune." So get there, and there's no set list. The rehearsal is there's these shapes written on paper, and when I see the circle and it turns orange, that's when you come up and play. There's no tunes. There's no set list. It's completely free and responsive. And I mean, I used to play that way when I was a kid, but then it stopped. And I have to tell you, the people, and this is a little bit out, you know, but it's grooving, man. But it's not going ting, 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 ting. And the people were screaming mad crazy over it. And so that freshness and freeness, I think, being willing to not be in the confines of sounding perfect, and even sounding ugly sometimes, and playing more as a reflection of how you feel and who you are and who your family and friends are. I think that's where my playing's moving, I hope.
Other questions? Two-part question.
Oh, geez.
Do you ever get into music funks where you don't want to practice?
The question is, do you ever get into music funks where you don't want to practice? I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think that goes for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, if you go teach 20 lessons in a row, you know, sometimes daily, I mean, yeah, musical funk happens to everybody. It's like this, you know, when you're a young musician, man, you climb that ladder fast, it's exciting. But then you reach a point where that next step is a lot harder. So there's that kind of funk. There's the kind of funk where you're just not feeling inspired. And so the thing that I do to fix it is I go hear live music. And I go, because this is how the music is meant to be presented. I mean, if you think about music in general, it's only in the last 100 years that it's been recorded. But music's existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. Go listen to live music and get inspired. That's what I do.
Which economically is becoming increasingly more and more difficult these days.
That's true.
Now, even with social distancing,
Yep.
I would echo
It's
everything
really
you're
tough right
saying.
now, yeah.
Like, and we've talked about this a lot. When you're first learning how to play, you have this growth period and then plateau, and so the growth period is longer and the plateaus are small. But as you've been playing for a while, it almost feels like the growth period is small and the plateaus are longer. So you kind of have to find ways to stay motivated to practice, and that could be playing with other people, playing with musicians that are better than you,
always with better, always. Yeah.
Now we're very fortunate. I mean, we're sheltering in place, but there's YouTube, there's Spotify. That's a whole nother ball of wax that is good and bad for musicians. Yep. But there's ways. I mean, you can stay current with live streams of people streaming things or putting stuff on the internet. There's so much stuff that you can draw inspiration.
It's the world
from.
that we're being forced to live in right now, and so instead of being depressed about it, which is super easy to do. Listen, man, I've played in real time with real people my whole life, and I miss it, and I cry about it. I promise you. But we just got to make the best of it, gang. I mean, I don't know what to say. But yeah.
What was the other part to the question?
What kinds of things, tricks do you do or encourage your students to do?
To stay motivated? I'm assuming that's...
For practicing.
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I'm going to chime in here first because he teaches 90 students a week, and I do like 40. Although
you're lame.
But anyways, he
has a family also.
I do. But I think the part of the trick is you can't have a one size fits all thing because everybody is different, and there's so many different personality types, and people learn differently. And we talked about this before. Like some people are auditory, some people are visual, some people are tactile. So you kind of have to just have a bunch, and the more and more you teach and deal with people, you kind of learn, okay, well, let's try this, or let's try this, or let's try that. You find ways to help people. The goal is you want them to enjoy what they're doing and have fun and grow. And so you kind of have to find ways to facilitate that. I mean, feel free to...
Yeah, well, I mean, Kareem's asked me before. He said, well, you never told me that when I was taking lessons with you. I said, well, I was just beginning teaching then. So, there's the evolution of learning how to teach.
I think students nowadays have the mellowed out version. I had Tracy right when he got off the road, and so I was like the guinea pig, and I'm very fortunate for that.
Oh, sorry.
But I think you grow as an instructor just like you grow as a player.
But I think all of what you said is absolutely correct. But I also think, and this is really important to me, is they have to trust you. And if you can get them to trust you, trust is a big thing. I think it's crucial to life and relationships of any sort. And it's something that I have a hard time with. But in regards to teacher-student relationship, they have to trust that you absolutely have their well-being in mind, and you're giving them the right information, and you can show them both through the way you live your life and the way you play that everything's possible. And if you can get them there, then there it is. I think that's what it takes.
That's a very good point. I mean, not only do you have to be able to teach it and convey the information to all these different personality types, but you also, I think it's important, particularly with jazz, is to be able to not only talk about it, but demonstrate it and show them how to do it.
And it's the reason, when you go home, you got to practice because, it doesn't matter. This kid will come, well, I'm going to play the Poulenc flute sonata. I'm like, oh, geez, now I got to go learn it. I'm going to play the Maslanka saxophone. It's like, oh, it's so hard. Really? No, please. But you have to. All the best teachers I ever had, there's that old saying, people that can't play teach. That's not true. The best teachers I've ever had were the best players I ever heard. Yep.
Yeah. I remember my question from earlier. This is a selfish thing, but this is important information that I think people are going to know. So, I mean, you play saxophone incredibly well. You play oboe incredibly well, flute, clarinet. So you've learned to double over the years. When did you start working on that?
Yeah, well, Keith Gorsuch in high school, junior high school, I went to my parents when I was 13. I said, I want to be a professional musician. They were like, that's nice, honey. Now go mow the lawn, But as a saxophonist then, it was a matter of economics. And playing a big band then, people were writing for flute and clarinet. Or if you wanted to play a show, it wasn't, it's economics. You had one person to play four horns, or instead of four people to play four horns. So, you get your salary. First double's 25%, next double's 20%. So it's a matter of economics. I mean, this is my business, and plus, high school band saxophone, I could sight read everything they ever put in front of me. So now I'll play the flute now I can do that. Now I'll play the clarinet. I mean, it was the challenge part of it was part of it also.
It seems like, and you can speak to this too, it seems like nowadays the big band charts, they're only writing for maybe you double on like a flute and a clarinet. Maybe. And you don't see it as much anymore because people don't double. Because there's no call for it. But when you were doing it, if you did work with the symphony, you'd get the principal pay for what you're doing, and then you'd get double pay for all the extra instruments that you play.
That's correct. I mean, like my first few days on the Tommy Dorsey band, lots of clarinet playing. Lots of clarinet playing that was played by people like Buddy DeFranco and amazing clarinet players. Now, most saxophone players don't like to play clarinet. I like playing the clarinet, and I studied clarinet. But my first song after the theme, Sentimental Review, was Opus number 1, and before my first concert, Buddy Morrow says, all the solos you can improvise except there's one you can't. You have to play the Buddy DeFranco solo on Opus number 1. I'm like, so I'm sight reading and I'm looking and it was horrible, and it was horrible the next night too. And then he came up and said, if you don't learn that solo pretty quick, you're gonna have a very upset band leader. I was like, oh boy. So I sat night after night until I could play it backwards and forwards. But yeah, there was a lot of that. And shows, singers, I mean, yeah, always doubles, always.
Another good point. I want to get this information to people that are coming up, learning how to play and wanting to know about these things. And I asked Rams the same thing last week. When you got the call to go in and do the Tommy Dorsey band, it wasn't just you knew how to solo and you knew how to sight read. You had a conception of that music already. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. One of the cool things about Berkeley was at that time they had the Woody Herman band, Toshiko Acoustic Band, Buddy Rich Big Band, every name, Count Basie Big Band, and so you would play in all these bands, you would strictly play that music.
Yeah. So you knew the music.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then years later, I think this was a couple years ago we talked about this. The Tommy Dorsey Band was in the area, and they had you come in and play, and you had all the charts for lead alto memorized. That's for correct. The most part.
Yeah. So some of the charts didn't show up. I just got hired to play second alto, I think, because some guy couldn't make it. But some of the lead alto parts, for some reason, were lost. And it's like the kid, he wasn't a kid. He says, like, I don't know what. I said, well, what songs are they? He said, I got it. He said, what do you mean you got it? I said, I got it. Yeah. Well, if you play for 300 nights for 10 years, you don't have to memorize. You're probably in the wrong game. Insurance might be a good call.
but that's also a good point. I mean, you see a lot of professional bands, and, a lot of times everyone's got the music memorized. So maybe can you speak to like memorizing music versus reading it?
Well, I can, and that's the art of the ear. And people talk about, of course it's easy for you. You're talented, and I think I mentioned this before. But talent's the cheapest commodity in the world. Everybody in the world has talent. I will say that I think I was born with a strong musical memory, which means when I hear something a few times, I can remember it, and that's helpful.
That skill can be learned,
absolutely can be learned, and I teach it. Yeah. And it's pretty non-conformist, but I'll teach someone a classical piece by ear. And by golly, they seem to play it a lot more musically than when they're reading it. Right. Yeah, I mean, and I know people don't do that, but I do it.
Yeah. So we're getting close to time. Do you have more time? Or
yeah, okay.
Questions? Do we have more questions from our viewers? Any more questions? Not at this time. Okay. Well, let's see. Other questions. So now you're here in Tacoma. You've been teaching since 1991, private lessons. You've taught the big band at Pierce College for quite some time. Now you're over at University of Puget Sound teaching, and the band has been very, very healthy since you got there.
Very healthy, growing, and really doing well. Really proud of those guys.
And you've had guest artists with the band. You've had Joshua Redmond. You've had Delfeo Marsalis.
Yep.
You've had Daniel Perez.
Yep.
Who am I forgetting? There's more than that.
Oh, Victor Wooten, Arturo. Yeah, it's been great. And for these kids that are, studying liberal arts and most of them are music majors, boy, it's a once in a lifetime. I've gotten to experience that life, but they may never get to again. And they always step up. And it's just, if you share the music the way it's meant to be shared, with love and dignity, and they trust you, then they buy in and they'll do whatever it takes to play it right. Yeah. Even if their ability isn't as high as some others, they rise. I'm telling you, every time. Yeah.
Well, anything else? We're going to start wrapping up here pretty soon, unless any more. Well, there's another question. Hang on. Sorry. What do we got?
How far ahead are you
The question is, how far ahead are you looking when you sight read?
Yeah. There's that whole issue of, do I look a measure ahead? I've never thought about that. Piano players think about that a lot. But in regards to sight reading, if you want to become a good sight reader, here's what I suggest. When I'm teaching a saxophone lesson, I'll play flute, and I transpose. And when I'm teaching a flute lesson, I'll play clarinet, and I'll transpose. And I'll put it in any key you want, and I'll play it as well as you do. And man, then if I'm reading a saxophone part, it's like Mary Had a Little Lamb. But I don't really think about looking too far ahead. Sight reading is a strong skill, though, and it's really important. Maybe not as much as it used to be, but I think it's really important. Yeah.
I see this quite a bit with students, and I'm positive you probably do too. They've maybe been playing in band for like 4, 5, 6 years, and they come into a lesson, and you say, "Well, what is that note?" And they have no idea,
God.
Or what is that rhythm? And knowing the difference between a half note and a quarter note and eighth notes, and then you throw dotted stuff in there, then all hope is lost.
Which is remarkable to me, but that's absolutely the case. Yeah.
Right. So I think to get better at sight reading, just be sure you know the notes on the page and know how to finger them and plan,
and know how to count,
and know the rhythms.
Fossil book, page 40, 41.
That's worth $20 right there.
That's
alone.
I'll charge you for the lesson.
So, all right. Well, Tracy, any more questions? All right, it's been a pleasure having you here.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
For those of you that tuned in at 11 o'clock, we apologize, but we're very glad that we got to do this. So if you could join us live today, great. If not, this will be online, and we'll be putting it up on YouTube later. And let's see, in terms of upcoming live streams, we've got a concert tomorrow at 6 o'clock, and then we've also got, I think Julian Priester will be our guest again coming up on the 22nd of June, Monday at 1 o'clock, and I'll be posting information about this soon. But Tracy, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure. Stay safe, you guys. Be healthy.
All right. See y'all later. Bye.